Last month at the Realm Makers Expo, we met many skilled Christian creators who are making amazing stories in books, games, and the visual arts. Yet some people believe all this imagination stuff is pointless or outdated and will soon be replaced by so-called AI art. Are they right? Will computer-generated content outpace creations made by humans? And is such a belief even moral or biblically defensible?
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Welcome again to Fantastical Truth, the Lorehaven podcast made by humans. Here we explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I'm me, Stephen Burnett. I publish Lorehaven.com, and I made a story as well, a science fiction novel launched earlier this year called Above the Circle of Earth.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I checked the box to prove that I am not a robot, and this is episode 274. Why shouldn't AI-generated content replace human stories?
Zach, I saw a recent headline which said that one of those AI things can also check the box to prove that it is human, so that's not good. Why do we even have these tests anymore?
Now you'll always wonder.
Yeah, web developers, you can just take that off the website now because apparently it's not going to keep out the bots at the door. Well, that was discrimination anyway, right, Zach? I mean,
don't be a speciesist.
Why discriminate against something just because it's not human? Well, I'm going to explain in this episode why. Because God made human beings. Human beings make stuff. Let's not get them confused, especially when it comes to one of our favorite topics at Lorehaven, that of God's gift of human imagination.
Yeah, well, this is going to be a big topic. It's never going away. You know, I thought this would be sort of a trend a couple years ago that we'll talk about for a couple months, and it just seems like we talk about it more than ever. But there are some really big AI services coming online soon that we'll talk about, like Showrunner, which is supposed to be the Netflix of AI, and we'll link to this in the show notes. But Showrunner will basically let you create any kind of fan fiction of anything ever, until, of course, the Mouse House or whoever sues them into oblivion. We'll see if that happens.
Go Disney. The rare example when I support big corporate Hollywood. Go Disney. Go Universal. Sue those thieves into the dirt.
All of the political things are like realigning right now. It's just so funny. But yeah, so things like that are happening, which that was actually the very first like AI generated thing I saw was a Muppets version of The Matrix, where it was Kermit the Frog playing Morpheus. And it was just like an incredible photo. I'm like, how did that happen? And I thought, are we going to see an entire Muppets? If y'all listen to the podcast, you know this is a reoccurring thing for me. I just want to see a Muppets version of everything. But that would be really crazy to see a Muppet Morpheus. There's been all kinds of things since then, but that was the first thing I remember. And now we may actually get to see things like that if you want.
You know, believe it or not, there was a Muppet version of a Charles Dickens classic called A Christmas Carol in the early 90s. Yeah, it was real. It was made by humans. And believe it or not, there was a Muppet version of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. No computers were used in the making of it.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it was in the mid-90s. Yeah, it was called Muppet Treasure Island. You seriously not seen Muppet Treasure Island? I thought we were doing a bit. Muppet Treasure Island is great. Okay, so now this actually illustrates something. Some of these things actually do exist, but people get misled by memes and think they don't exist and think there ought to be more of them. It turns out the Muppets did 2 versions of classic stories and then they stopped because I guess it wasn't actually worth it. The money wasn't there, even though both of these films are fondly remembered. It was a little too late for them to experience success in theaters. And I don't think computer-generated versions of that are going to help much either. By the way, you said, Zach, we'll put that link in the show notes. Will we, though? I don't know if I want to promote Showrunner. Why, they're not a sponsor, and I don't want people going off and making stuff like that. So maybe don't look for that link in the show notes, but I will put links in the show notes for some human-made reviews that we're doing at lorehaven.com. Go beyond the podcast and subscribe free at lorehaven.com and get reviews of the best human, Christian-made fantastical novels that we found, like Winter's Chill, released, I think is just today, from Morgan L. Bussey, and an upcoming review of a novel called Unfixed. We'll have those links in the show notes for you. Also new at the site, Josiah DeGraff did write about a movie I don't want to see called Superman, and he has a Lorehaven on-screen article about that. Also link in the show notes. And we're starting a new book quest in the Lorehaven Guild for a science fiction novel called The Time Door. I think that just started this week, and the Guild is on Discord, and you can subscribe free, get the secret access code at lorehaven.com. And our first sponsor is that new novel, Winter's Chill by Morgan L. Bussey from our friends at Enclave Publishing. This is book 2 in the Nordic Wars series by Morgan. Fighter, emissary, long-lost daughter. Brigid has one mission as she returns to the north, to warn her people of the oath that binds them. But the mountains are treacherous, and snow comes early, leaving her on death's doorstep until she has an unexpected encounter that not only reveals a secret about her past, but also brings new allies into her life. Meanwhile, the healer Caden must come to terms with the awakening of his Eldaron power. With winter approaching and the war on hold, he ventures to the White City to uncover his heritage. As he walks the ancient halls of his people's birthplace, he discovers not all adversaries are across the battle line. He must navigate political opponents while searching for a way to stop those of his kind who have turned to the darkness. Yet even the bitterness of winter cannot keep Brigid and Caden apart. A connection has been forged between them, and their bond might be the one thing that could save the Nordic people and end the war. Enclave Publishing presents Winter's Chill, book 2 in the Nordic Wars series by Inspi Sela and Carol Award-winning author Morgan Bussey. It is available today, August 5th, wherever fantastic books are sold. Ask for Winter's Chill at your favorite bookseller or your local library, or order it online at Amazon or enclavepublishingstore.com. It is also available as an audiobook from Oasis Audio. Well, you'll find plenty in the show notes for this one, folks, including some quotes and notes, a few articles Zach has picked up about what's next in this burgeoning field of AI content generation that, in my view, and not to put too fine a point on it, is an existential threat to everything we believe at Lorehaven about the value of God-given imagination and human-made storytelling. So I'm going to be more hardline in this episode than I was before, but I've got some powerful allies from classic literature, such as Mr. Beaver, who it turns out had AI on his furry mind all along in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when he said, and I quote, "When you meet anything that's going to be human and isn't yet, or used to be human once and isn't now, or ought to be human and isn't, you keep your eyes on it and feel for your hatchet." It's a direct quote from Mr. Beaver. Lewis, prescient through his talking animal creatures. The same is true of Arthur Weasley, the patriarch of the Weasley family from J.K. Rowling's novel Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, who in the book warns his daughter after a particularly bad incident involving a possessed diary. "Jenny, haven't I taught you anything? What have I always told you? Never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain." Well, in the wizarding world, as in the real world, it seems that artificial intelligence ought to be shunned, but those are by human authors who have a lot of gifts, may not necessarily have the gift of divine inspiration, unlike the authors of, the Bible, which in Joshua 8:26 says specifically, and again I quote, "Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the javelin until he had devoted all the inhabitants of Ai to destruction." End quote. We could end the episode right there, but of course it requires a little bit more setup to talk about the risks of AI and why, as I say in the title, which I wrote and I do own it, why shouldn't AI generated content replace human stories? We're going to nuance that a little bit here, and that starts with the return of the concession stand. We get this one out only every once in a while for some of the more heated discussions. But this heated discussion here is a conversation I view among story fans with some applications for creatives. Lorehaven is a fan-centered resource, and so is this podcast. I personally, however, I will say that I do use AI sometimes, Grok in particular, for basically as a glorified search engine. I will do some limited nonfiction research. I will look for links. I will ask questions about what's wrong with my car, maybe what's wrong with me, things like that. It's pretty good with that. However, I still insist that the search engine give me specific links to reliable primary sources. I think that that is so important. And some of that is my journalism background, but you've got to cite your sources, folks. If you're doing any kind of nonfiction research like this, you can't just say, oh, well, the thing where I can't see or it keeps its brain told me so. That can either hallucinate or it can rely on some deceptive source. So always check your primary sources. I will never, ever outsource my creative works to AI, by the way. Of that, I can assure you. We at Lorehaven promote stories made by humans, which most specifically refers to the covers and content of a novel. Zach actually been putting that little stickers you may have seen on the back of hardcover copies of Above the Circle of Earth. And I say, just wanted to let you all know, if you don't mind a sticker on your book, that this novel has been made without AI-generated content for the cover and the story itself. And people really seem to appreciate that. People, however, will debate whether or not they should use AI-generated stuff in the marketing for novels and movies. I've heard some discussions about that. Some people saying, well, I ought to be able to use AI to generate the back cover of the book or a summary of the book or something. And I'm not going to break fellowship over this issue, but I am going to come a little hard on this one. And maybe I'll get in some other discussion somewhere else about that. I actually oppose this also. I think that you may use AI to research the type of marketing that you may need to do to shape the direction of your outreach for a story. But I think that marketing already suffers from a sort of inhuman emphasis when it comes to ideology and weirdness. And in fact, Zach, you may be aware that there's been a lot of discussion recently about a marketing stunt that someone pulled and whether or not that is a human or not. In my view, it's a little too human because it actually endorses the sin of lust, but it is a little bit more human than using this sort of weird, and some call it woke, ideology in marketing. Folks resonate more with someone who appears to be a real person, and that's what I want to feel even when I'm reading just the slogan for a movie or a book. I want to feel the human touch there, and I'm pretty sure I can feel when it's poorly written or written by a machine. And I'd rather read poor writing by a human being, by the way. Fans want that personal connection. And Zach, you mentioned earlier that you think that this could be a trend, and the discussion just seems to keep going. I think that some of it will be a trend. I think that eventually we will level this out into when it's being used to, read the X-ray or shape the research into a new prescription drug or maybe write your legal document. But fans do want that personal connection with characters and with authors. And I think that more and more the market is going to reward people that invest that kind of personal time. And I think that people are going to be willing, and I'm certainly willing, to spend more on a book or a movie that I can be assured was not generated, but was actually made by a human being. But I'm still going to oppose the use of AI to generate content because I don't want us to have a two-tiered popular culture. I don't want there being this cheap stuff for people that's generated rather than made by humans. Imagination is God's gift, and I think we all ought to pitch in and support these kinds of stories. We're going to speak, though, in these next few chapters, particularly to the critique Zach mentioned in another conversation we had. Oh, well, AI will level the playing field. Now everyone can be an artist. Now everyone can be a storyteller. Well, I've got some thoughts about that. But Zach, what would you say is the best version of that idea?
Let me make my point before you rebut it.
Absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah. So my concession stand is less of a should or shouldn't, and it's more just of what is or what will be.
I am inevitable.
Yeah. So I think, so let me just start with my big idea of all this, which is that the future of entertainment content is indie created, AI assisted, but human generated.
Okay.
So I'll say that again. The future of entertainment, it's going to be indie created, AI assisted, but human generated. So it's going to be stories written by humans with the assistance of AI. And then you get into the other media forms like audio, video, gaming, whatever. There's going to be AI assistance to some degree in everything that we see that's going to be indie produced. And the reason I'm focusing on indie produced is because I think we're moving as a culture into the indie space when it comes to books and all kinds of entertainment. We've already seen this happen with the music industry. It's already happened in the author community. I mean, I think it's something like half of all genre fiction is indie authored now. But we haven't quite seen this happen with movies. I mean, yes, there's been indie movies for a long time, but in terms of like mass appeal of movies, we've definitely seen some big hits. Like Sound of Freedom is one we've talked about, where that just ate up everything that was on the screen at the same time. But my overarching thesis is that automation will swallow the world, and it already has. A really good meme I saw about this the other day that said, "Do you remember bank tellers? You remember when you had to go into a bank to talk to a person to withdraw money?" And no one does that anymore, basically. They all use an automated teller machine, an ATM.
Well, if you even go to the bank, you may just be able to zap your phone and even cut out the ATM middleman.
Who even uses cash, right? We just use Venmo or whatever. But in so many ways, automation is always what humans want as a technology. And it's you can think of any industry and there's automation. I mean, I just saw a video of a completely automated farming machine in China that does all of the tilling, all of the planting, all of the watering, and all of the harvesting entirely by itself, entirely automated. Now, maybe they have to charge it or program it or something, but this machine can look at everything, and it has these cool like hooks and conveyor belts and baskets and everything. And it's, that's the future. The future is automation. So it's going to play a part. Obviously, we're going to debate about should it or should it not, but it's, I'll end with my favorite quote about all of this, which is "Hasta la vista, baby." So Terminator 2, you have a good robot fighting a bad robot. And that's basically my whole feeling about this. It's sort of a love and hatred at the same time. It's a warm feeling and like a disgust feeling, because the only way that they beat Skynet is with a reprogrammed Skynet android. And, that movie is like, it's like sci-fi, horror, comedy, family drama. It's so many things all at once. And I think that's really representative of the future we're moving into.
Now, Arnold in Terminator 2, Zach, how is he different from the T-1000? What is the one thing that Arnold's character is trying to do that the T-1000 isn't really caring to do? What is it?
Well, he's reprogrammed by the future John Connor to save the John Connor in the past. And so there is that human element.
There you go. Isn't he also trying to be human, more human in that story? Aren't the best robots the ones who realize that they're lacking in something? And I can never be like, even Lieutenant Commander Data in Star Trek TNG, he realizes that he lacks emotion and a certain grasp of humanity, but he yearns to be as human as possible. And so we ourselves can resonate with that, because sometimes we don't feel as human as we can possibly be, or maybe we're, quote, on the spectrum, end quote, and struggle in social situations or to understand certain kinds of humor or emotion. And so we can resonate with that journey. I do like stories about robots that are trying to be human, but it is science fiction. There is still a spark of the humanity in them, because generally they are being played, after all, by human actors. So it's a human playing a robot who's trying to be human. So you cut out the middleman and we're still connecting with the human being there. It's a trick of the imagination where we're being told this is a robot. And I think, no, it's actually not a robot. It's a human being.
All I'm going to say is I cried when that, spoiler alert, but I cried when that robot died at the end and gave the thumbs up as he's descending into the lava. So, just explain that to me. Why did I have feelings about a robot?
Because a human being made that story. Terminator 2 was directed by James Cameron. It was made by human beings. And even a fully CG feature, I saw a trailer recently for the Avatar, the third movie, and it looked great. It looked like a movie that took itself seriously. More on that in the next episode. But even though it's all these amazing computer graphics and all that, the most important element of it is that it seems to be about these human characters, or these human-like characters. And they're trying to celebrate life, even using this giant bunch of technology. And that, I think, gets through if it's human beings using these tools. And so that's why I'd want to ask, Zach, what you mean by AI assisted, because that could go really bad, or it could go in better directions, maybe more of the directions that you and I have in mind. Let's go to chapter 1. The risk that AI art, if we view this as a replacement and not an assistant for human created art, if we have that replacement view or that skeptical, cynical view about human-made art, then we're dishonoring popular artists, even from major movie studios, even who are very popular authors or storytellers or game designers. And yes, I know that fans and authors and publishers are debating how or whether to use these tools. But what I've seen and am very disturbed by, to the point of saying that this is a sinful view, is this sort of anti-corporate, anti-popular celebrity artist perspective that some have. Some people, particularly of a particular conservative persuasion, will say, well, big Hollywood has been ruined by woke ideology and all these terrible things. And so really just all ought to go down. The institution is corrupt, so let's throw it aside. And by the way, this is kind of a shared anti-institutional reaction. God, really, it's kind of an anarchy perspective. Well, marriage is gone and government is gone. It's all been corrupt, so let's just burn it all and start over. Well, that is the impulse of Satan, who doesn't want to redeem the world. He wants to ruin it. Whereas Christ has died to save his own people and then will eventually redeem the world. I don't believe in throwing out things that were originally good but became toxic or poisoned by human idolatry and other corrupt influence. I believe in fighting to redeem these things, and so do many people, even non-Christians, who are making good things in this system. Zach, kind of coincidental here, I saw a clip I hadn't seen before of Tom Cruise. Now, Tom Cruise, a Scientologist. Tom Cruise isn't going to heaven. Tom Cruise isn't a Christian, but Tom Cruise really likes movies. And apparently, back when we had all these lockdowns going on, Tom Cruise got up to some shenanigans to call one studio and say, hey, we're over here making movies. What about you guys? And then that studio, who thought they should be under lockdown, went, well, they're making movies over there, so we need to make movies. And apparently, Tom Cruise was a big part of getting these people to push back against arguable, useless, ineffective lockdown mandates to start making stories again. And so good for Tom Cruise, who's not associated with particular political agendas, by the way. Have you ever seen him get tangled up in that stuff? He hasn't been.
He avoids it. In fact,
so he avoids it. Many people do when you know to look. Many people do.
Yeah, I mean, he was directly asked about this in the premiere for the new Mission Impossible about the tariff situation. And he said, I'm just taking questions about the movie.
Yeah.
And that was such a great sidestep.
Wise. Way to go, Tom Cruise. I mentioned this a couple episodes ago as well. Tom Felton is one of the few actors in the Harry Potter films who doesn't get involved in the politics. There are many directors who don't, or who even seem to lean what you might call conservative. Michael Bay will blow things up and then show an American flag. Now, it's like a certain Blue Jeans ad. You don't want to go too far in that direction of exploitation and such. But you can't just sit back and say, well, it's all woke and it all ought to go down. That is a slander. That is a lie against your neighbors. And Christians ought not to be saying that kind of thing and ignore the common grace, even in these studios. Zach, I saw Fantastic Four, which actually was very good. I'm glad that I saw it. I look forward to seeing it again. And it reminded me of that common grace that is even in these big blockbuster movies. Not only was there nothing woke about it, but there were some very positive virtues there. And I walked out, and many fans walked out thinking, wow, guess what? We really like Sue Storm now, or Sue Richards. I forget what her last name is, the Invisible Woman. She is a great female hero. And all of the critical YouTubers suddenly did a 180 and went, hey, this is no girl boss. This is a wonderful female character who loves her family and who sacrifices for the world and all this good stuff. There's good stuff, guys, even in those big movies. And even if there isn't, they're made by humans. The AI generation is not. And I particularly disagree with this idea that I think we're already getting through indie creators, that AI in particular is going to democratize the making of art. Zach, any thoughts on that? I got a quote on that I don't want to spring, because I don't think we really believe this. I think we're just saying it because we're mad at the woke or something like that.
Well, I think you might be being a little overly optimistic about how much common grace percentage-wise is powering some of these bigger studios.
Not powering, just there, here and there, occasionally.
Yeah, well, I think they are not being driven as much by common grace anymore. I think they are reacting right now, they're in panic mode because of how horribly so many of their movies have performed.
Good.
And you're seeing sort of a realignment of some of the studio heads are like, hey, we got to make a profit. But the thing is, there are enough people in this industry, and it's a critical mass, I think, that don't care if they make money or not, because they can just use it as a tax write-off.
Yeah, they make it as social credit for their betters that they think in the woke religion.
They are on a religious crusade for all of their progressive politics. Let's just be honest, what they're trying to push through movies. And there is quite a bit of money laundering, I think, in my opinion, happening through a lot of these productions where it's not really, they don't have to worry about the money. Now I think some of that may have been canceled by the federal government, but there's still state things, there's still NGOs, there's a pretty big complex of, there's a very big spider web of funding that goes into movies, and a lot of it is going to continue to push those things. Now, we might get less of these sort of secular religious type things, but I don't think Hollywood has gotten Christianity or conservatism or anything like that. I think they're just responding to the market, but they also don't know. I saw a really good post from a friend of mine that said Hollywood is trying to pivot, but the problem is that they have gotten rid of storytelling tools and craft. They are not hiring people based on talent and skill and track record and experience, but because of ideological reasons and basically just favoritism, demographic favoritism is why they've hired, openly admitting that. And so the problem is you've got all of these ideological employees and you've gotten rid of the highly skilled employees. And you as the CEO might want to pivot, but your workforce can't just pivot along with you. So I think it's still, they've got a long road ahead of them in a lot of the studios. I also think that they have destroyed trust so much in so many people that there are a ton of people that will never go back to a major Hollywood studio for a movie.
Well, I went back to see Fantastic Four, but I agree. It took a lot of work for me to do that. I had to force myself to go see it, even though I'd already seen better reviews from people who would have been critical, and I'd read reviews myself, and I liked the music, and I liked the director, and I liked most of the cast. And of course, I'm also a little sick of Pedro Pascal, who is a complete weirdo and a woke activist and all this stuff, but you kind of forget he's there, honestly. And we'll talk more about that in the next episode. But yeah, there is a trust factor there, but I'm not trying to prove that it's all good, you guys. I'm just trying to prove that you gods, false gods out there among the Hollywood critics, you do not need to rain down fire and brimstone and destroy the city of Sodom, okay? There are more than 10 faithful people there doing good things. I don't need to say the system isn't actually rotten to the core. I believe the entire world is rotten to the core, but I believe the world will be redeemed by God in his own time when Christ returns. Now, that means that Christ eventually is the only one who can save Hollywood or creativity if he chooses to. I don't believe that I can. I don't believe that you can. All that I need to show here is that you do not need to consider burning the whole thing to the ground and then switching to something just as artificial, if not worse. What's that first word in AI? It's artificial intelligence. You are now going from the frying pan to the fire if you think that you're going to fix artificial morality and artificial accounting and artificial popularity with artificial imagination. Not cool. I want us to get away from the things that are artificial. I want us to get back to those things that are real.
Now, let me tell you why people are turning to stuff like this showrunner tool and the many other things like this that we're going to see. It's because they still love a franchise, but they don't trust the people who own it. And yes, let's talk about Star Wars. So,
or Star Trek even.
Yeah, right. I am not interested in any more Disney Star Wars stuff, but I have been collecting all of the Star Wars EU books, including by some faithful Christian creators like Kathy Tyers. So there's some great Star Wars books out there. But what am I supposed to do if I want to watch a Star Wars show or animation or just listen to something that's an original story? Well, that's where I'm not saying I'm going to do this, but I'm saying there is a type of fan that's going to turn to some AI to bring some book to life or to have a alternate ending of episode 9, or just a totally different sequel trilogy or prequel trilogy. And even, yes, I know there's some purists that don't even like Return of the Jedi that would rather that end differently. So that is the draw of AI. It promises to give you the story you've always wanted, and no one can get in the way.
Guess what can also do that? You writing fan fiction. People can write fan fiction. No, they can't profit from it. But if the goal is to do the story in a way that you wanted it seen done, go write fan fiction. If you can't write fan fiction, go get training and get good at writing fan fiction. There's this impression that only the AI can give you something. And I realize there's this idea of, well, that you're going to have the surprise factor, but now you're asking a computer to give you something that is impossible. Surprise me with something that I totally expect. That is rather absurd, and it's not going to scratch that itch for the human connection that the original Star Wars stories have given us. And by the way, you can still get some of that with Andor seasons 1 and 2. Both absolutely fantastic. Definitely darker than you might expect with Star Wars, but the reviews have been good for those stories, and certainly for a reason. Zach, I think Andor seasons 1 and 2 and then Rogue One are the prequels now. They did a little stealth operation to make some new prequels.
The prequel to the prequel.
The prequel to the prequel. That actually is that. Well, technically it's an interquel, right? Because they're set after the Star Wars prequels. But then even the Star Wars prequels now are seen as superior to the Disney sequels. So yeah, I don't think AI is going to give people what they're looking for. But on this idea of that it's going to democratize things, that now everyone can be a creator. Well, I think we already have that leveling playing field thanks to indie publishing, thanks to the ability for people to use these tools and then make a YouTube video. And no, you're not going to be able to make something that looks as good as a multi-million-dollar blockbuster movie. But maybe you shouldn't. If those movies with all those advantages can't make a good story, I'm not sure why somebody with a little AI tool could be expected to. I don't think that's going to be anything more than a novelty. But I think that spiritually, it is a problem when people just dismiss the skill and maybe even the wisdom of some of these top storytellers. It's kind of a false view of democracy that swerves too far in the populist direction. It's actually the sort of thing that Screwtape condemned in C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Proposes a Toast, where Screwtape is actually making observations about the English public education system. And I think Lewis explains that this was a trick. He was actually commenting on American public education. And Screwtape's scheme here is to promote this idea that democracy means no one is better than anyone else. Everyone is the same. Equality, folks. It's the line, I'm as good as you, even if you haven't worked that hard to get there or you don't have the personal character as that other person. That's a little more complicated. The simpler version of this attitude actually is famously promoted by Syndrome from that fine human-made story, The Incredibles 2004, where he says, oh, I'm real enough to defeat you, and I did it without your precious gifts, your oh-so-special powers. I'll give them heroics. I'll give them the most spectacular heroics anyone's ever seen. And when I'm old and I'm having my fun, I'll sell my inventions so that everyone can be superheroes. Everyone can be super. And when everyone's super, no one will be. I don't want to imitate Syndrome in my response to artificial intelligence tools.
Well, and I think that's actually what's driving a lot of the this movement to give people the spinoff or the sequel or the alternate ending or the fan fiction AI generated movie that they want, because it's really coming from a place where the art itself does not matter. All that matters is just giving people what they want. That it's entirely consumer product ification of entertainment. I think the other factor is that what AI does is it personalizes everything for you. Like that's the whole promise of it. That what the Industrial Revolution did was give you a lot of things that are exactly alike, whether it's clothing or automobiles, even electronics, and made those cheap. But what gets expensive is if you want the custom car or the custom suit or the custom computer. And AI sort of flips that around, where it's like this mass market product, but that is highly tuned to you and what you want. so that's why I think it's sort of inevitable in a sense, is in that it's not that we're going to go watching movies at a theater that are AI generated. It's that everyone's going to have their own AI generated movie on their phone at home. So I foresee kind of a dark, like I said, my favorite movies, Terminator 2, when it comes to this stuff. I think we are headed for a dark future, right?
Well, that's the cyberpunk cynical side of you. And I think you're probably right. But in that case, I want to be a prepper. I want to get ready for that kind of future. I want to be ready with my biblical arguments against that sort of thing, and in favor of art that is made by humans, even if the humans are not Christians, even if the humans are in a dysfunctional, deceptive system like big Hollywood. But I also suggest that a lot of those temptations are going to filter down to the independent creators as well. And that is a little bit closer to our space, Zach, where we see more of these creators, Christians and otherwise, who are going to be tempted by some of these things. And I would much rather they not. I am here. I've literally pledged my life to promoting stories that are made by Christian fantastical authors. And I don't want this stuff getting in the way of that, frankly. I want us to be, Christians in particular, to be the human alternative for when these algorithm-driven artificial moralities and stories and imaginations start taking over. We need to be prepared for that. We need to be the refuge that people are going to seek out. And I think it's already starting to happen. And not just Christians, too. There are going to be all kinds of people from different worldviews who are going to endorse human-made stories, and I want to support what they're doing as well. That includes our second sponsor, author Dan Megill, back with his new novel, The Waymaker's Foresight. This is a new science fiction adventure by Dan Megill, who's also the author of the acclaimed Earthburst trilogy. Gavin and Nax are smugglers struggling to find work on a backwater space station. So when Lila, a highborn lady, hires them for a short jaunt to the nearest wormhole, they don't ask many questions. But Lila is fleeing the galaxy's mightiest empire, carrying knowledge of lost technologies that could reshape the stars. Now this unlikely trio must learn to work together as they race between star systems and unravel forgotten mysteries, while staying one step ahead of the Imperial fleets and a ruthless prince. The Waymaker's Foresight can be found now on Amazon as well as Audible. Visit Megill.com to learn more. That is Megill.com. The Waymaker's Foresight, also available at Amazon.com. Looks like that one was made by humans, so I'm glad to celebrate that. Hey, Zach, you can actually go and talk to the people who made these stories, particularly if they're independent creators. And shoot, even George Lucas showed his face recently at Comic-Con, and people loved seeing him. That's not a computer. That's not a robot. It's not C-3PO that made up the Star Wars universe. That was George Lucas, a man, flaws and all, but created in God's image and created to create. And whether or not you like his prequels, you got to respect him, and you got to respect the people that he worked with. And if you respect someone made in God's image who's not a Christian, how much more do we need to respect faithful Christian artists who are not only made in God's image, but are being remade in Christ's image? And this emphasis on AI art as if it's going to take all over everything, that dishonors these faithful Christian artists' work. And that's the theme of chapter 2. This goes to the purpose of Lorehaven, as I mentioned, to promote fantastical stories for God's glory, especially by Christian authors. And we often, as a side hustle there, critique stories that feel artificial. They exchange realism for sentimentality or easy morals, kind of the stereotypical Christian social drama fiction in which you get saved and all your problems go away, or an angel heals you of cancer or lets your little boy go to heaven and then come back. That stuff is sentimental. It's not very realistic, and it promotes kind of this escapist view of reality. Well, paradoxically, we believe the best fantasies come back around and show you reality all over again. It's the kind of escapism from artificial living. And so if you make everything about artificial intelligence or artificial artificial, I don't think anyone's actually said that yet, then you're going right back to the kinds of bad fiction that we're talking about, the kinds of stuff I thought we already agreed we don't like. We don't like the artificial stuff. And so here on this podcast, as well as all over Lorehaven, we share the stories by top Christian storytellers. Like last week, episode 273. We had Tom and Tony Bancroft, veteran Disney animators. They have been training and getting good and illustrating and bringing to life some of your favorite characters, not just at the Disney studios, but many other creative franchises. They've been doing this since the 1980s, both Tom and Tony. And they've got a new movie coming out next month made by humans called Light of the World, an animated film about the Apostle John's discovery of Jesus Christ. And if you're going out there saying, well, big Hollywood is nothing but corrupt, you're now throwing out faithful Christians who have, at least in the past, been able to reflect Christ's glory into this system. Tom and Tony were telling me last week, for example, about Glenn Keane and other Disney animators who are faithful believers who saw their work as an extension of their faith. You know, there's Glenn Keane helping make The Little Mermaid, and in his mind, these characters are all behaving as Christians would, even in this fairy tale, and that's his headcanon, and so it informs the story. And so all along, you've got these good people, not just doing common grace in stories, like, yeah, good stuff, beautiful stuff, truthful stuff, but actual expressions of the gospel, specific saving grace. And they're active in the system. And now a lot of them are going out like Tom and Tony Bancroft and many others we know who are doing these independent stories, not just books, but also games and music and movies and shows. And if you throw all that out and say, well, that's no good, we just need to outsource it all to a computer, then that makes a mockery of God's gift of human imagination. You're actually mocking or holding in derision these human beings, our Christian neighbors, who have been faithful to make good stuff for God's glory, whether it's with a big studio before or a small studio now. And if you're going to replace that naturally occurring imagination that's a gift of God with something that's artificial, then you may as well go ahead and also replace God's morality with artificial morality, like the big woke corporations are doing. You may as well replace actual popularity and profit with Hollywood accounting and artificial auditing and stuff like that. I don't think we need any more imposter realities. I don't think we need any more artificiality in our stories. We already complained about that in the Christian movies where you get saved and then everything gets better. I don't think we need to outsource anything to AI over top of the image of Christ in fellow believers.
Well, something I'll agree with you on, at least I think you'll agree with this, is I don't think Hollywood has to fail for excellent Christian stories to succeed.
No.
And you're right. I think that a lot of the excellent Christian artists, storytellers have started out in some of the bigger corporations. But I will say, until there is a critical mass of Christians rebuilding or building new institutions of their own,
amen.
We're just not going to take enough of the culture back. Like when I was talking with J.J. Johnson at Realm Makers, the marketing director, he made a great comment of like, this is how we win the culture war, by creating our own stories. And I was like, amen. I totally agree. That's why I'm here at Realm Makers. And what I hope to see happen out of this new expo, which was amazing to have just hundreds of new people there, is sort of a mashup or a team up of people of different disciplines. For example, we had the Christian Game Developers Conference there. Well, maybe they're looking for some writers, and maybe they're looking for some designers. Like we have a lot of artists that do book covers and other kinds of illustrations. Man, why don't we get some of these people together? Why don't we create our own video game studio? Everyone's complaining about how bad video games are. Let's just make our own, but we're going to have to take these risks. It's going to take some really business savvy people. It's going to take some trust, and also an attitude of like, indie doesn't mean going it alone. Like it means you are finding your own people to make something bigger than you could do on your own. But again, I'll go back to kind of my thesis, which is I think these indie creations are going to be AI assisted in some way. I think there's simply too much to do for all of the creative tasks for a small, scrappy, ragtag band of dissidents of Christians to get some quality stuff out there without some kind of automated help. Now, this might just be research. It might be brainstorming. It might be organizing things. Like I talked to a filmmaker during Realm Makers, and he said he uses AI to make his storyboards and sort of his cue sheet for when he goes and films actual people in actual places. But he knows, like, my time is short. I don't have a lot of resources. I can't hire a storyboard artist. I can't hire a assistant director, but I can use AI to do those things, and I can get it done quickly, and we can get this project done a lot more quickly. Now, that's going to make some people nervous. And even in this conversation I was in, another one of my friends was pushing back. He's like, why don't you hire me to do that? So it was kind of a lively conversation.
So AI will do the jobs that Americans won't do. Is that that's kind of what's it starting to sound like a little bit?
I mean, AI is going to do the jobs that people want to automate rather than going back to the bank teller thing. This is the inevitable part. There's always going to be things that are automated. Now, what I think we agree on with this whole topic, though, is that we shouldn't automate the imagination. We shouldn't automate the characters and the plot and the story and the setting.
There you go.
Let's not automate the theme. Let's actually create all that stuff. I just think that some artists are going to use AI and some won't. I get a really weird feeling around a lot of this stuff, because even when I've said, okay, Chat GPT, why don't you help me brainstorm an idea for this scene that I'm writing? I've done that a couple times and I'm like, I don't like any of these ideas. In fact, I'm going to do something totally the opposite.
Good. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's because, as you said, a lot of these LLMs are trained on data sets that are very biased. They're very driven by San Francisco cultural politics and norms. So that's where a whole other dimension comes into this. There's a very interesting new AI tool that Thomas Umstattd told me about. It's called Cosmark or Cosmarch. There's a whole article I can put in the show notes. It's called, the first article was Build AI or Be Buried by Those Who Do. And so the author of this, his point is that there's going to be AI. Like, AI is just going to exist in this world. And so either you can have your own AI that's aligned to your values or in your stories and your worldview, or you're going to be relying on other people's AI that's misaligned to what you believe in. And what he did was, by making this, he says it's sometimes wrong, but it's always right, as in politically right. Okay. And so what he did was train this AI on sort of the classic literature of the West. And so it's very much trained on like a classical view of man, of the world, and whatnot. So it's culturally conservative in that way. Not necessarily Christian, because I don't think this guy is a believer. And so this is going to make for some interesting, bedfellows in this space of like, do we use AI? Do we use the AI of the Silicon Valley? Do we use the AI of the tech bros who are sort of this progressive right? Do we build a Christian AI? I don't know that we can even do some of these things, because these data centers are like the size of a small city.
Yeah, I think that there would be equal risks. For example, if I wanted to make a Christian movie and I got some large language model and I trained it exclusively on the PureFlix streaming service, I don't know exactly that's going to create a whole lot of freedom for my project, because now I'm also my project, all the incoming data is going to be shaped by all kinds of people whose worldviews I may also have issues with. I could say more about that, but I think my main thought is that I'm a little nervous about the term, which is AI assisted. That to me says, sure, I'm going to see it on the screen. It's going to be generated copy in the book. And I don't want to see that stuff on the screen.
It's sort of a catch-all term that could mean a lot of things. It's a big gray area.
It is a big gray area. But I think that even if, for example, it's being used for a storyboard, well, have you yourself trained to design storyboards? Do you understand the principles of drawing the little comic strips that are being used for the framing of the movie and such? Well, in that case, I might not be so nervous. But if you're using it as a cheat, like if you don't know what you're doing and you just say, well, the computer will do it for me, now I don't think you're an artist. You're a content generator. And I think that is devaluing the faithfulness of Christian artists in particular, who have trained for decades to get good and have the ability to create something new and not derivative.
But that's actually the future that I see. It's people who have decades of experience in filmmaking that are using, like, so
I'd be less uncomfortable with that.
Yeah. So I have another friend that he very much knows the language of cinematic storytelling, screenwriting, and he showed me just something he made for fun with Google VO. It was very impressive, very good storytelling. Like, he wrote the whole script. He used AI to make the visuals for it. It was just kind of like a fake trailer for like a fake movie. But because he knows this language, it actually worked. Now, would he actually make a whole movie that way? I don't know. But he wanted to see, like, can this actually make what I have in mind? Can I communicate to it effectively enough? So I think that's the sort of AI assisted thing that we're going to see, where people know kind of the limits of what they can use AI for and what they won't use it for.
Well, in that case, we may need a new phrase than AI assisted, because the whole topic has become so charged and even politically charged, in particular because of the factors we'll talk about in our next chapter. And I don't want people getting the impression that AI is doing the hard work. Yes, I know how to wash dishes, but I would rather put them into the dishwasher and have the dishwasher do that for me. But if my dishwasher breaks, I need to know the basic principles of getting that dish clean. Anyway, just like someone who will use a calculator for doing math, I don't think they ought to be given the calculator in first grade. You need to do some work to memorize your multiplication tables first. You need to understand the basic principles of math, or else you are going to be a deficient human. You're not going to grow. You're not going to mature as a human being or as an artist. And there's also some ethical difficulties, even with the large language models. Of course, we'll talk about those in the next chapter. First, however, I took the last sponsor segment for myself with my sci-fi novel, Above the Circle of Earth. Actually, a few weeks ago, I was on a panel about AI and kids, hosted by Alan Brocken, along with Carrie Nates and Clint Hall. And I was asked the question, well, how does AI function in this world? It's in the background. This is not an AI story. There are sentient machines and things, but this is a human-centered story about Brock and Alicia Rivers, a young couple who were exiled from Earth because it is illegal to do an evangelism there. But in their impetuous youth, they did an evangelism together and ended up on Mars, striving to protect their family for 7 years. Now, the secular regime is taking over more of the solar system, and it's time to push back. So Brock and Alicia are summoned back to their homeworld on Earth to start the first space mission, not on Earth, but beyond the Earth, above the circle of Earth. But first, they're going to have to put up with some enemies on Earth, even some shadowy ones hiding from among them. And ultimately, we have a story that is a sci-fi thriller meets the Book of Acts, Above the Circle of Earth, launched earlier this year from Enclave Publishing. They have a fine crew. It's available in all systems, hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. Terrific audiobook. And you can go to estephenburnett.com to learn more. And go to amazon.com. They may still have, if you catch them early enough in early August, they may still have this crazy sale going on with the hardcover. I may need to get some of those myself. It doesn't hurt me none, but Amazon's deciding for some reason to promote this story, really cutting it to a drastic sale right there. So definitely check out Amazon for Above the Circle of Earth. We'll have that link in the show notes for you too. By the way, yes, this story is made by humans, despite being science fiction. And that leads to chapter 3. We'll wrap up with this one. AI art can involve sins like lies and theft. And we've already talked some about the scraping of all these creative works, including big copyrighted franchises from Disney and Universal Studios. And now those empires are striking back. They're filing lawsuits against the AI scraping, saying, hold on, we didn't give you permission to do this. Now, you can generate a picture of Buzz Lightyear along with Bugs Bunny, and we don't like that. And I'm actually Team Disney and Team Universal here, because even though they're big corporations, guys, I am not some sort of activist. I don't think that corporations are evil. They are not made in the image of God, but people made in the image of God work there. And they ought to have the protection of law and copyright. So argue about that if you like. It is the law. And I think it was wrong for the computer systems to scrape the art. And we need ways to show that our societies value these works of human imagination. It is simply ethical to respect them.
Those court cases are still ongoing, but the judge in many of these has upheld the right of the AI company to train its system on these copyrighted works. Now, a couple of the companies have sort of gotten in trouble for using pirated copies of these works. But essentially what the court has been saying is you can't copyright a style. Because it's the same way of like, there's been a lot of authors over the years who have gotten a hold of like a copy of classic books or their favorite books, and they've just typed out all the words of the book, not to sell, but just to learn that style of that author. And then they go create their own work, informed a little bit by this style and informed by another style, and sort of a mashup of styles. And courts have said you can't protect a style of writing. And so in as much as these AI systems create images or text or sounds or whatever that are original enough, the courts kind of seem to be backing away from it. Now, the Disney one, though, is that basically entire Disney characters are being recreated. And so it's not, a mashup of like 5 different characters from all these different franchises. It's like literally just Buzz Lightyear pops out when you type it in. The systems aren't as subtle or clever enough. I think it remains to be seen how much of this is going to get protected versus struck down. But ultimately, you can't copyright in the Copyright Office an AI generated book. You have to have written something to get a copyright on it. So I don't think it's a sustainable business model in a sense to have a totally AI generated book, because then you don't actually own it. I mean, I know that books are being sold with this stuff, but I don't think it's a very long-term like business model.
No, I would really hope that sort of thing ends up getting pushed out of places like Amazon in favor of stories that are made by humans. And I know that is definitely a stretch goal, but whenever a villain with a giant glove full of gems says, "I am inevitable," I'm going to take the side of the heroes and say, well, I'm Iron Man. So long, sucker. I'm going to take the position of the underdog. And I don't like it when people say about so-and-so government or so-and-so worldview or so-and-so false religion. Well, this is inevitable. We're just going to have to work with it. Like, that is you posturing. That is you trying to pretend. And I think it's only someone who knows that the whole thing has been built on a house of cards that is going to try to flex like that. I am, in this case, if you want to fight for the underdog, believe it or not, in the face of some of this AI revolution stuff, I think that even Disney ends up being kind of the underdog, but it's more the artists who are working for Disney and Universal who have made these drawings. No, you cannot prevent people from copying their style, but you, I think, should be able to prevent people from copying, especially for profit, someone's character, someone's drawing, which is still under copyright. Now, if you've got an issue with copyright law, and I've seen people do this, well, whenever someone says, well, I have an issue with copyright law and blah, blah, and I think this, I just copy their comment and I attribute it to myself and I just shut them down because no one actually believes that. They're just trying to be anti-institutional and they're trying to be raucous. And I think it's absurd. But not only is it absurd, it is unbiblical. The Bible itself says, thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not steal. And that's where we get our ethics, even going back to copyright law. I don't even believe that you ought to label a book written by someone else with the name of a popular author. I am against uncredited ghostwriting. I think that you need to give people credit for the creations that they've made as much as possible. By the way, that's why I actually do sit through the credits at the end of a movie, not just because you might see another superhero at the end of it, and there's no way I can read all those names, but I think it's at least a token sign of respect. The music's generally pretty cool, by the way. But you also are saying something about, I respect the many thousands of people, sometimes thousands of people who've made this movie, or the dozens of people who have made this book. And each one of them is made in the image of God and it has spent years, hopefully not stealing or doing unethical behavior to get where they are, but training and doing so within the constraints of human laws, hopefully, in order to get to this place in the credit sequence. And I want to respect those folks, and I want to push back against any of the lies and deceptions and thievery that you sometimes use for these systems.
Yeah, I just don't think we're going to get excellent Christian movies with that big of a cast anymore. I think it's going to be indie, much smaller cast.
Almost certainly, yes.
But the kinds of AI tools I think are going to be used. So let's take animation, for example. I think how this will work, because this is not my area necessarily, but an AI tool can take a drawing that you do and then animate it for you. And so now, how did that tool learn how to animate something? Well, yeah, it's probably trained on a lot of other animation. So it learns the mechanics from other, animators, but it's animating your creation. It's not putting on Buzz Lightyear's spacesuit or something, or Woody's hat. It's purely just your own images, but it's bringing it to life in a way. But the artist can say, well, I drew that. Now I automated the animation. Okay, I didn't have an animator, but I'm the artist of that character at least. And so that's the sort of thing I predict will happen, that we're going to see from kind of some indie studios. Now, again, if fans look at that and say that still doesn't look right, it looks, because the Polar Express did not land very well.
Good point of comparison. Yeah, Uncanny Valley.
Yeah, it might be in that uncanny valley where technically it's good, but it just doesn't work very well. So
it's not going to be anything new either. There's going to be very little innovation there. No one's going to see what I think they should be seeing, even from a small Christian-made production. Whoa, this is something new. We're saying something different. We're showing something different. There's a tweak on the style or the formula that we expect, and I think that approaches more closely this ideal of the God-given human imagination to make new stuff using God's stuff, not just to remix the things that have already been made. I mean, sure, technically there's nothing new under the sun, and we are all limited to the world that God has made, and only He can create something that is brand new. We have an exact library of primary colors. We cannot go beyond that spectrum. I understand that. But AI is even more limited than we are. It's not going to do something groundbreaking with animation like you would see, certainly from a major studio, but even from a smaller studio. I've never seen anything like the Wing Feather Saga show. It is really unique and with a small team of animators. And I understand that some, especially experimentally, will use AI in some way, maybe hopefully in the background to get their animation done or to speed a process. I would hope, however, that someone is doing that kind of assistance, using that kind of assistance with wisdom and with limits on it, limits of the conscience, if not the contract. But I will say this, and this goes particularly to books. If I'm aware that a novel, if the content of the novel has in any way whatsoever, and I include idea generation, if I'm aware that the story has been generated by AI, certainly the paragraphs and sentences, if I become aware of that, then I'm going to avoid the book as if it is corrupt, because now the author's name on the front, if it doesn't say John Q. author with AI assistance, then the cover has lied to me. The cover has told me something that is not true. If the entire book is AI generated, then even more so the deception. I would actually tell people, hey, avoid this book. This author is lying to us. And that is not ethical. And it is particularly unethical for a Christian author. Now, if it's a Christian show that used AI in the storyboards, yeah, I don't think I would shun that. And either way, I wouldn't question your salvation. I would just question your judgment. In either case, and I know there's more discussion about this, but it is bad enough out there with artificial morality and artificial seriousness and artificial Hollywood accounting. I really don't want to add too much artificial intelligence to that. Time is too short. I want to be discriminating about the kinds of stories that I'm going to enjoy. I don't want this sort of mass-produced stories for people who don't know any better. I think that great imagination is for everyone. It's a unique way to reflect God's glory, particularly His beauty in the world that He's made. Tools should help us do that, not replace our call for doing that.
For me, I'm not interested in AI-generated stories simply because AI doesn't have a story of its own. And only humans experience the world and have stories. AI doesn't have emotions. It can't feel pain. It can never experience joy or betrayal or any of the human experiences. And so all it can do is mimic other humans' experiences. So a human generated story, it tells you something new about another person, and it resonates with your own story in a way. For me, that's the main reason why I want to read a story. It's like I want to see this author's world or this situation or another, and I'm not going to get that experience. I'm not going to get that connection to a computer. And so for me, it's just a very practical reason. It's just not interesting to read those machine generated stories.
Zach, I think that's a great point. And that's why I think that AI generated art, and I put that in quotes, will ultimately, I think, bear out as a novelty at best. Someone probably within the next few months will come out, if they haven't already, and say, well, this is the first fully AI generated movie. This is a live action AI or whatever. Like you said, Zach, it's probably kind of difficult to copyright. I don't see how the profit motive would work there. When you've got man-made stories failing to make a profit, it seems that machine-made stories would have more of the same issue. But ultimately, I think stuff like that will be seen as a novelty because it's not made by humans, and people are going to recoil from that intuitively, despite all that we say that we want. We want a Muppet version of this, and couldn't we just have a Star Wars anime that does this and this and this, and then rewrites the Disney sequels? We say we want those things. I don't know if we actually would like the results of that. And that leads me to a closing question. Imagine an alternative universe where God, the author of scripture, used AI instead of that personal divine inspiration. Imagine some weird quirk of the timeline where he fed it through a computer and then out came the word of God. Well, it wouldn't be of God, would it? It would be artificial. If claimed that it was the word of God and then it was just a computer that made it, well, now we've got an author who's lying to us. And there's even less of a personal connection there. And yet God himself deigned to reveal himself, his desires, his nature, his plot line through his written word, using the words of human beings who were inspired by the Holy Spirit. That is deeply human. That is deeply personal. And when we look out also in the creation that God has made, we know a little about him as well, just by seeing the things that he has created ex nihilo, out of nothing. Now, we can't create that way, ex nihilo. It may feel like we can if we feed stuff into a computer, but all it is remixing everything. And I would much prefer that we get as close as we can to that creative spark that God has given us. Tools can help, absolutely, and we can debate how they should be able to help. But let's approach as close as we can God's method of creation, the personal method drawing on our personal human experiences, the imago Dei, the reflection of God in us.
Well, to you, our listener, we want to know, would you, after everything we've said, would you watch an AI-generated movie or read an AI-generated book? So send us your thoughts to podcast@lorehaven.com or find us anywhere on social media, or the best place, our Discord community, the Lorehaven Guild.
That's a trick question, and I can say that because I wrote it, Zach. I don't think there's such a thing as an AI-generated book, because books are made by humans. There's no such thing as an AI-generated full-length movie, because movies are made by humans. Everything else is just content. It is artificial. Next on Fantastical Truth, well, we have just seen the end of this year's summer blockbuster movie season, such as it was. Most of the drama, at least that I've seen, was about the movies rather than in the movies. And fans now seem to be debating more often whether these stories should focus on the fun with simple virtues as opposed to serious stories that have a lot of aura and mythological connections. Right now, it seems that Team Fun is winning over Team Serious. But also, nobody is really winning the box office. Maybe it's that Hollywood accounting, that artificial profit that we were talking about. But either way, our next topic, how can Christian fans engage stories that are fun versus stories that are serious? Whether your stories are fun or serious or have particular ideologies that may not be according to a biblical worldview, I favor stories that are made by humans. Yes, I would watch a woke movie. I would watch a bad superhero movie. I would watch a flippant story if it was made by human beings, even if I don't like it, rather than watching an AI-generated story, because humans, no matter how flawed, still reflect the image of God. An AI story just cannot get close. I don't even think it's a story. I don't think it counts as a book. I think that it is a tool we can use, hopefully, to make better stories that glorify God as we keep on seeking and finding His fantastical truth.